Thank you, Danny. Thank you for inviting me. I won't touch it, I promise. Thank you for inviting me. I just want to say that about getting lost at the university, that when our oldest son was 5 years old, he was kind of ill, and I brought him here with me. And after walking half an hour at the university, he said, "Daddy, what kind of a building is it? There is no outside." And which is why you get lost. Okay. You always get lost here. Okay. So this is the topic of my book, of my lecture. And what I want to do is share with you some thoughts about why cities can be very inspiring when we think about solutions to situations where there's contestation and tension and even violence, which all derive from the multi-ethnicity or multicultural or multi-religions or what have you of particular societies. So I want to start with a few examples, and the first one is from Rijeka in Croatia. It's the third largest city. Can you see it, or should we turn off the lights? It's the third largest city in Croatia, at the very top. And the reason I went there was that there is a wonderful school for advanced studies there. And I attended the school several times. And in each time I attended the school, like everybody in the city seemed to, they were like eager to tell me that Rijeka did not participate in the Civil War. And they told me, look, in 1981, a third of the population were not Croats. So you would expect the city to be involved in the Civil War. But in 1991, they decided that they couldn't care less and did not want to participate in the Civil War. And I thought to myself, there are two things which are extremely interesting here. First, why is everybody telling me this? And the second, why did it happen in Croatia? In Rijeka, why not in any other city in Croatia? So I started to study the history of Rijeka, and I found out, for example, that when in 1938, when it was under an Italian rule, right? It was first Italian, and then after World War II, it became Yugoslavian. It was subject to the race laws that Mussolini introduced in Italy. But the city decided that they didn't want to accept the race laws, and Giovanni Palatucci, who was the local police officer, destroyed all the documents that had to do with the Jews and smuggled the Jews to his uncle, who was a bishop in the south of Italy, and they were saved. 5,000 Jews were saved. He eventually died because the Nazis found out about it. He died in the concentration camp. But again, the question is, why in a country which was more or less sympathetic to the anti-Semitic ideology, why did it happen in Rijeka? This is Amsterdam. Amsterdam has been resisting racism for many years, and if you look at the election results in 2014, you see that there's a huge difference between Amsterdam and The Hague and Rotterdam. So if in The Hague the PVV Wilders party got, a xenophobic party, got 7 seats out of the 42. In Amsterdam, they got 0. And when people marched in Rotterdam shouting, "Whom do we not want here? The Moroccans, the Moroccans." In Amsterdam, they marched a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, like this, shouting, "We don't want racism." So again, the question is, why Amsterdam? Why is it different in Amsterdam? What is Amsterdam doing that this is the result? And this is Toronto. All over Canada, you have so many immigrants in the big cities, right? In the cities of Vancouver, in Montreal. But Toronto went out of its way to allow the immigrants to have voting rights before their naturalization. They failed because somebody appealed to the Supreme Court and argued that you had to be Canadian according to the Constitution in order to vote, so they failed. But they did decide officially that immigrants should vote in the local elections. And again, the question is, why Toronto? Why not any other city? So I think the first reason that it would be inspiring to reflect about cities and to study cities is that it is extremely interesting to compare between different cities in the same country and see what is one of them doing right, which will allow us to eliminate, if we could, or at least decrease the tensions between populations. The other reasons is that if you think about cities as institutions, they really differ from states, mainly in the rationale that operates them, so to speak. So if states are about accumulation and coordination of coercion, in cities it's all about accumulation and coordination of capital. So there must be something there which makes a difference between how a city copes with tensions and how states do. If in states it's all about policy standardization, in cities we embrace chaos, if you want, or we embrace the incompleteness of the system, and we think that this is part of the city. If in states the demos is more or less stable, like even if you have many immigrants coming to a state in 1 year, the effect is rather marginal on the entire population, whereas in cities, the effect would be dramatic, as it was, for example, in Munich in 2015, when 10% of the population arrived in one summer. But also there's the question about who is really the demos of a city? So I don't live in Jerusalem, I live in a small town outside of Jerusalem. But I spend all my working hours here, I shop here, my children studied here, I support the local basketball team, etc. You know, am I part of Jerusalem? Should I vote in the local elections as a commuter as well? There are many questions like this which I think make the city a very different institution, but mostly the idea that in states, the governing principle is sovereignty and therefore independence from the other states, whereas in cities it's all about cooperation and networking. Cities cannot function alone, they have to network, they have to cooperate. And therefore I think that, or as Danny and I and Noam are trying to show in yet another project that we're involved in, we hope to show that indeed efficacy is conceived very differently in cities, because there are so many more opportunities both for direct action but also for participatory and deliberative democracy. So as institutions, I want to argue cities differ from states. Cities are also growing centers of power, first and foremost because of their economic power. So 80% of the population in the states which belong to the OECD now reside in cities. This country is second in the world. 92% of our people live in cities. But also the economy of the city is so much more significant now. And you have cities like London and New York and Chicago and many Chinese cities whose budget is much larger than budgets of many states. So even within Europe you have states like Serbia and Croatia and Lithuania and other states which are relatively small, whose budget is smaller than London and Paris and Berlin. So I think Parakana, the intellectual, put it beautifully. He said, the 21st century will be dominated not by America or by China, but by cities. And indeed, cities are centers of culture. If you compare Israel, Israel's culture is relatively traditional and I would say religious, whereas Tel Aviv markets itself as the gay capital of Europe. It's a 24/7 city and so on and so forth. And also cities are becoming centers of power which challenge the state. So President Trump says, I'm going to be tough on immigrants. And you have immediately 300 cities declaring themselves to be sanctuary cities, saying we are not going to apply your rules. We are not going to order the police to stop people and ask them to show ID cards. And President Trump says, I'm going to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, and immediately you have 40 cities in the world cooperating in order to save the Paris Climate Agreement. And you have all kinds of incidents. In Israel, there is a fight between Tel Aviv and the state about businesses being open on Saturday. In the United States, you can't purchase or buy cigarettes if you're below the age of 18. In New York, they said no, below the age of 21. There's a regulation. And if you're a smoker and you're between 18 and 21, that's really something if you live in New York. Or in France, they didn't know what to do with the burkini, and Nice immediately said, okay, in Nice, you're not allowed to wear the burkini. So I'm not saying this is good. All I'm saying is that cities take more and more political power, initiate and challenge the state. But I think the most interesting reason why it would be interesting to study how cities rather than states deal with contestation is that a city is a different level of political consciousness, by which I mean that we live simultaneously both in the city and the state. So you're stuck in the car in a traffic jam, and you think, oh gosh, there's so many traffic jams in this city, right? So you think city. And you need some medical drug, and you look for a pharmacy, and you say, why the hell is there no pharmacy around here in the city, in this neighborhood? And you think city. But then you get the drug, you buy it, and you think, oh my God, this is so expensive, and you think state. And we switch from thinking like a state to thinking like a city, or seeing like a state and seeing like a city all day long. And we live these two existences together. And I came to realize this when I started my research on immigration, and I thought that I should start by interviewing people in various European cities. And I was in Berlin on a beautiful summer or late spring morning. I went to interview people. I strolled in the city, and I came to a school where I saw somebody who was waiting to be interviewed in the neighborhood of Kreuzberg, which is very multi-ethnic. And he had just put his son in the classroom. He went out and he said, you want to hear my views about immigrants? They rape our daughters, they steal our money, they exploit the goodwill of the German welfare system, etc., all these slogans. And I was kind of embarrassed, and I said, well, could you please describe me your most recent encounter with immigrants? And he said, sure. Only yesterday did I come with my child, like I came today. But when we came, we saw that in the corner of the schoolyard, there was a child crying. And I asked my child, why is he crying? And my child said, well, they just recently came from Kosovo. He doesn't really know the language very well. He doesn't have friends, so he's been crying all day. And I told my child, then don't just stand like this. Go and invite him home. Tell him we'll give him some good supper, and he can play with you. We don't want him to cry all day, do we? Now, what happened to this interviewee? I mean, seconds before that, he was giving me all these slogans about raping our daughters, right? And then he was he told me how he went out of his way to be kind to this immigrant. Now, you could say that this was because this was a child, right? And we all become softy when we see children. But that's not quite true, because in my interviews, I realized that people who have this ideology, xenophobic ideology, or really oppose immigration, they don't distinguish between the elderly and the children and women and men. They just see the immigrant as an abstract entity. It was because he shifted from seeing like a state to seeing like a city, because he immediately thought about his encounter with immigrants, which is a human issue. It's not an ideological issue. It's when we go to the shop, when we stand on the queue in the supermarket, when we see who drives our taxis and who cleans the streets and so on and so forth. So I realized that we encountered with the other citizens rather than citizens. And I thought, okay, cool. It would be interesting to study how cities cope with immigration, especially in cases where there is a lot of contestation. So the research was done also in San Francisco, New York, Rotterdam, Hamburg, and Thessaloniki in Greece. But I'll tell you today a little bit about Jerusalem, very little about Jerusalem and Berlin, and more about Amsterdam, because I think Amsterdam has an amazing model of how they cope with immigrants and how they ease the tension. I tried to be as empathetic as I could when I interviewed people, laypersons in the streets, citizens in the streets of these cities, because, you know, we liberal academics, we like to think about ourselves as very progressive, and we don't want to hear all these slogans against immigration. But then I wanted to be as open as I could to these sentiments. So the first thing that I found was that, indeed, city dwellers conceive the city as an institution, as an entity which tries to tell us a coherent and consistent story about who we are and what we are. This is what we call in our book the spirit or the ethos of a city. So a city wants to give us a story, and a story has to be one story, a single story, a coherent story, right? New York is about being ambitious. Jerusalem is about religion, okay? But immigrants bring with them pluralism, and this creates a chaos in the story. It challenges the story or the ethos that the city tells itself. And it challenged this on 3 different levels, people told me. The first level is all these things that we don't like to admit that we see when we see immigrants, right? The color of the skin, they cook with garlic, they shout or they don't shout, they're not polite, they are polite, they're too shy. All these things which I would call sociological pluralism, and which don't go hand in hand with the sociology of the city which hosts them. The second thing is perhaps more interesting. So, for example, one interviewee said, I'm a EU employer, so I came to this city from another country, and I deliberately wanted to live in a neighborhood where there are lots of immigrants because I'm in charge, or I'm in the Department of Migration in the EU. And my daughter, who is 16, went alone to a cafe, and there were 5 men there, Muslims, who told her that she shouldn't come alone to a cafe. And my daughter said, what the hell, this is not our value, okay? This kind of tension is what I would like to call value pluralism. So cities like to think about having their own values, but immigrants bring different values, and the question is how you cope with this value pluralism. But these 2 pluralisms are between persons. I think that one of the very interesting pluralism which people told me about was an inner pluralism which is created by this encounter with immigrants. I would like to call it psychological pluralism because it's about the plurality of the self. So somebody in Munich was not part of this, but somebody in Munich put it very straightforwardly like this. I've been in Munich 35 years, I'm Christian, I'm white, I'm rich, the city is rich, the city is affluent, and all of a sudden, in one summer, we have 100,000 people coming here. They're not white, they're not Christian, they're not affluent, they're not conservative. I don't know what this creates in me, he said. Who am I now as a Munich dweller, as a Munich citizen? This challenge I would like to call the psychological pluralism challenge. And I would like to argue that the 3 cities which I'm going to discuss cope with the 3 different levels in the following way. Jerusalem decided that it can cope only with sociological pluralism. Okay? Berlin says we'll go one step further. We'll cope with value pluralism. We'll be tolerant and we'll embrace all these values that these immigrants bring with them. But we ourselves will not change. Whereas in Amsterdam, when we want to argue, people say, I'm a hybrid person now. Okay, I will give you the quotes in a minute. I embrace the personality of the immigrant in me. Okay? And I think this is an amazing model. I'm not sure that many other cities can do it, but I will try to show you that it's interesting. Okay, so 2 minutes about Jerusalem and Berlin, and then few more minutes about Amsterdam. So many people don't know, but in Jerusalem there has been migration of not only Jews, 4,000 Jews come here every year from abroad, but also of Muslims and Christians, mainly Muslims. And you can see the growth of the Muslim population in the last 60 years here. It's quite intensive, it's quite big. But in Jerusalem, it's not only that we have three nationalities, we also have not only three religions, but I would say 6 or 7 religions if you think about Orthodox Judaism. You know the joke about the dean of the faculty of law in Harvard? He says we have many religions. Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, etc. Okay, so the same we have here in Jerusalem. And if you walk in Jerusalem, you see that we tend to live in our own neighborhood. So you would have a neighborhood of the Oriental Orthodox Jews and a neighborhood of the Western or European Orthodox Jews, and a place where the students and the secular live, and a place where the others live, and so on. And also the old city is divided to 4 quarters, and so on and so forth. And I started to talk about with a lot of people. This was done during a whole year, so I guess I talked with hundreds of people or thousands of people in Jerusalem about pluralism. And mainly the answer was, are you out of your mind? This is the city where monotheism was created. We have one truth. Not only we believe in one God, not only we believe in the God, we think that pluralism is a metaphysical mistake. It's a wrong attitude about the word. And also we have God on our side, if I may use the famous song words. So there is a tension built into the city, and of course Mark Twain beautifully put it when he said in 1867, "It seems to me that all the races and colors and tongues of the earth must be represented among the 14,000 souls that dwell in Jerusalem." I think this is the solution that Jerusalem decided to adopt. This is from the light train in Jerusalem, and I don't know if you can see it beautifully, but the secular guy looks one way, the Arab woman looks another way, and the Orthodox Jew looks another way. So I think it is right, as somebody said, this city is too holy. I guess the fact that Jerusalem still survives is the best proof that God exists. But also, like in the 19th century already, I found postcards from Jerusalem that adopted this attitude. So you don't have postcards which show the various ethnicities and cultures together. You have a postcard of the Bedouins, or of the Palestinians, or of the Western Jews, or of the Western religious Jews, and so on and so forth. You don't have postcards which show everybody together. And it seems that despite attempts like the YMCA, designed by the famous American architect Arthur Lewis Harmon, to bring together the various religions and to celebrate, as they said, the unity of the 3 religions, what you have more than that is things which are described, events which are described in the diaries of, say, Ronald Storrs, the first British governor of Jerusalem, where it's all about fights between Jews and Arabs, about territory, about rights, and so on and so forth. I'll skip about this. I think part of the problem here is that many of us Jerusalemites defined our preferences in terms of what philosophers would call other regarding preferences. So, just for example, if I'm Orthodox and I say, in order for me to really experience the holiness of Shabbat, of Saturday, I need you, the secular, not to drive in my neighborhood. That's an other regarding preference, okay? And if you analyze many of the preferences as they are put forward in the public debate in Jerusalem, it's all about what the others should do so that I can survive. And of course, in order to express this, we throw stones at each other. So I think this sentence, which was given to me by one of the interviewees, describes this very, very well. In Jerusalem, we are like exhausted boxers waiting for the referee to put us in the corners and tell us the fight is over. More than that we can't do, But still, we managed to survive and to coexist. There are attempts to do more than that, like this project, but they're very rare. Okay, I won't go into details about Berlin, but I'll just say this. After the unification of Germany, Berlin decided that it would go forward with being transparent, both in its architect, this is the Sony Center and the new Museum of Art, and also in this dome which was built above the Reichstag. So when you come to the Reichstag, which is the state, what you see is individuals walking above the state, and it means to symbolize the political power that is given to individual vis-a-vis the state in the new Germany. And they decided to embrace all immigrants and to be as open as they can and as multicultural, partly by asserting that the city is neutral between ideas of the good. It's not going to prefer one idea of the good over another, so much so that you have in Berlin, just opposite to this church where people still worship, the Museum of Sex. Okay, together, this, you can't imagine such a thing in Jerusalem. And so much so that when Muslims came to the mayor in Berlin and said, you know, kids here study philosophy, but we want them to study religion instead, and there was a huge campaign about it. The mayor, the previous mayor, Klaus Wowereit, said, over my dead body. Okay, we are not going to intervene in what schools teach in this city. So, unlike these two cities, Jerusalem, which says it's enough if we cope with social pluralism and manage to control it, and Berlin, which says we'll do more, will embrace your values, but will be indifferent to them. We should not change ourselves. In Amsterdam, people went out of their way to tell me how much they are happy to integrate and to internalize the values of the other. So here is somebody, a lawyer, whom I interviewed for more than an hour. He said, in the morning I'm Christian because this is how I was born. But in the evening I'm Muslim because I celebrate my next door neighbors' holidays with them, trying to internalize their customs and values. And I had more and more and more citations like this, to the extent that I didn't believe myself. And I sent my research assistant who spoke Dutch to Holland. And I said, listen, take 5 days and interview people in Amsterdam about what they think about migration, about immigrants. Then go to Rotterdam and interview people in Rotterdam. And after the first night in Amsterdam, she sent me this email. You don't believe what somebody told me. He said, the immigrant is my other self. Okay? Or people told her that when immigrants asked them, how do you say bread in Dutch? They said, well, how do you say it in Arabic? And then they decided that they would teach each other the languages. And when she asked them, you know, why? The person said, because if I want to integrate the Syrian, I have to know his language. Okay? That's very different from how we think about integration, which is the assimilation of the other, the immigrant, into our culture. What they're saying is mutual assimilation. We assimilate into each other. And you have this in the history of Amsterdam quite a lot. For example, many people in Amsterdam told me, oh, this behavior is in place. And it struck me that the word in place reminds me of something. When the Jews came to Amsterdam, they got rights. I'm talking about 16th century, 17th century. They were so happy that this was the first time when they had their own political rights, that they called Amsterdam Mokum. Mokum in Yiddish is place. But the interesting thing is that the Amsterdammers started to call their city Mokum. Where do you live? I live in Mokum. And you have lots and lots of cafe Mokums and restaurant Mokum and gallery Mokum in Amsterdam. They use it as a second name of the city. Okay, the same was done when in 1975 they failed to integrate the immigrants from Suriname after the independence of Suriname. In 1990, they had deliberations in the city, and then they decided, first bottom up, but then top down, that they would do something about it. They knocked down the whole neighborhood which they had built in the 70s for the Surinamese, and they rebuilt it. It's called Bimini in the southeast of Amsterdam, with mixed accommodation and so on and so forth. And they even brought the stadium of Ajax Amsterdam to the neighborhood. And the idea is that the hooligans who support Ajax Amsterdam will have to go to the place where the immigrants live, mix with them, and learn about them in a very authentic manner. So with this I conclude. When you include somebody from indifference, like in Jerusalem and Berlin, your attitude is very beautifully put by Kwame Anthony Appiah. The stranger's values are not rejected, but their strangeness remains. But in Amsterdam, I got the following. I really enjoy the way immigrants changed Amsterdam. I love it. I am proud that the city can contain all these identities. Immigration is an asset. It's an opportunity for my self-growth. It's not a threat, immigration. It's an opportunity. And as Jazz, the lovely owner of a beautiful shop in Amsterdam, said, there is no mainstream into which the immigrants assimilates. Instead, the mainstream is constantly constructed by dialogue. This, when she told me that she had moved from Rotterdam to Amsterdam, and I asked her why, she said, this is why. When I went to this amazing cake shop, you can see that the decoration is extremely colorful, but also the cakes are so colorful. And I mentioned this to the waitress. She said, of course, this is Amsterdam. Very, very colorful. And I said, yes, so many different identities. And she said, no, I mean, inside us, we are colorful. We have many different colors among us, but also within us. In each one of us, there are many identities, and this creates the community we are. And even the Museum of Van Gogh is organized according to this rationale. So the exhibition is about how Van Gogh, in different periods in his life, internalized other ways of painting, methods of painting, like the Japanese style and the French style and so on, and created a new Van Gogh in him by this. Finally, there's a huge festival in Amsterdam, which they call the Milkshake Festival, and this is how they announced it. Milkshake celebrates the city and its initiatives and is an impetus to bring the courtesy and friendly manners back into society. Thick, thin, small, large, gay, straight, trans, black or white people are the salt of earth, and this is what we celebrate. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for comments, questions. If you want to ask, just make it brief, because Avner has to go and teach in a few minutes, so the floor is open. Yes, maybe introduce yourself.
Thank you for your lecture. It's very interesting, especially given the light of the name of the conference. My name is Mandy Turner. I'm director of the Kenyan Institute, which is a British research centre based in Sheikh Jarrah. I'm interested in the way in which you framed your lecture is talking about immigrants, particularly when we're talking about Jerusalem. Who are we talking about in terms of the immigrants in Jerusalem? That would be my main question. Also, as a social scientist, I was kind of interested in the way that you were dividing states and cities, because actually cities are also modes of control. They're also modes of accumulation, as well as states. So I think your division, in some ways, if I can be a little bit kind of rude, is based on this conception of the kind of everyday politics, which I think is actually depoliticizing a lot of the issues around cities. So a lot of the issues does revert to who's in power and what some of the arguments that they're put forward for in terms of partnership with communities. So I just wondered if you could reflect on these two issues. How are you comparing Jerusalem with other cities in terms of immigration? That seems to be a very strange comparison to make. And also the issue around states versus cities. Thank you.
Thank you. These are two very important questions. I hope I can do justice to them. If not, you can Google me up and send me an email and we can discuss it by email. So many people don't talk about migration to Jerusalem, but there has been continuous immigration to Jerusalem of both Jews, like the average is 4,000 people a year, not internal immigration, people from abroad who come and settle here, as part of the immigration of Jews to Israel. And there has been immigration of Muslims despite all the obstacles which the state of Israel puts to them. Many of them from the occupied territories, sometimes by marriage. Even to this, Israel tries to cause as many problems as it can, but there have been a lot of people who have been there. There were a lot of people who came in the last 50 or so years, and therefore I think that that's something that people just turn a blind eye to. I think this is a very interesting question to ask. You know, how does it affect Jerusalem? This competition about the majority in Jerusalem, which is nobody talks about, right? But there is this political competition about who will rule Jerusalem, who will be more powerful, also in demographic terms. So sometimes the kind of immigrants who come are very different if you compare Jerusalem to other cities. But having said that, we also have here a lot of immigrants from Sudan and South Sudan and Eritrea who are illegal immigrants. So not as many as in Tel Aviv, for example, but there are many in Jerusalem as well. The second question was, okay, so just remind me very briefly.
Just the distinction that you made between states and
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you.
Also saying that you're depoliticizing
Yeah.
the city. The reason why Jerusalem is divided is not because there's immigration or there's migration here. It's divided for political reasons.
Oh, right. Okay.
You're
Okay.
depoliticizing.
Okay. So thank you. So what I tried to argue was that Jerusalem was divided right from the beginning, from the 18th century, when not only because Jews were coming here and they wanted to settle in different neighborhoods separated from the Muslims and the Christians, but also because already the Muslims were divided between them and the Christians were divided between them, and the Armenians had their own neighborhood and so on and so forth. And that this was reflected also in Mark Twain's book in 1867 when you can just read the description of this separateness and mutual exclusion which he describes in Jerusalem. Having said that, of course, everything is political in Jerusalem. The moment you breathe in Jerusalem, it's political. And there are many, I should try to put this as gently as I can. There are many politicians and institutions and groups in society which are very happy with this exclusion, and they would like to see even harsher terms of exclusion. If you look at the elections to the local municipalities, only 2% of the Arabs participate. So they're not really citizens of Jerusalem in the full meaning of the term. So I'm not pretending to say that I depoliticize this. Not at all. All I'm saying is that there are different political aspects in the city. Or the city is a different political institution with a different rationale. And therefore I think that it's extremely interesting to look at cities rather than states, because we have been looking at states, but we should look at cities as well.
Yeah, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Please in the back.
Hi. So my name is Sonia and I'm from Queen's University in Belfast. Sorry, I came a bit late trying to find the place. Anyways, I'm sure everyone's compassionate. But I came a bit late, so I'm not sure if I got exactly what you said. But when you were referring to the Muslims immigrating to Jerusalem, are you referring to Palestinians that are under occupation in the West Bank and siege in Gaza coming to East Jerusalem that is under illegal annexation and occupation? I wanted clarification on that, please. And the other thing, when you talk about Arabs, which I assume you mean Palestinians.
Which I assume you mean?
Sorry?
I didn't hear the last sentence.
When you about Arabs, which I assume you mean Palestinians, and that they don't participate in a municipal election. I mean, that's obviously because they don't want to form part of this illegal annexation. There are aspects in this conversation, I feel, that are being left out for those that do not know. You know, this place is illegally occupied and annexed in terms of East Jerusalem. And I think that in terms of international law anyways, and I think that needs to be brought to the fore, you know, that is a city that's being illegally occupied, part of it anyways.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I happen to be born Israeli, but this doesn't mean that I'm not a human being. I appreciate what you say. I agree with it. When I said Arabs, I didn't mean only Palestinians. There were other Arabs who came to Jerusalem. Some of them might be defined as Palestinians, like the Bedouins. Sometimes they don't define it. Not all Bedouins define themselves as Palestinians, so I don't want to impose this definition on them. And there were Arabs outside of the borders between the River Jordan and the sea who came to settle in Jerusalem as well. And yes, the statistics that I have are from 1967, from the occupation till now.
Thank you.
Thank you.